The Haunted Dolls of Mexico's Island of the Dolls. I never believed in curses, haunted objects, or restless spirits. As a freelance photographer and travel writer, I had visited countless eerie locations and investigated local legends all over the world. Ghost stories were just that, stories. At least that's what I told myself as I stood at the edge of the canal, staring at the infamous Island of the Dolls in Xochimilco, Mexico. The island known as La Isla de las Muñecas had fascinated me for years. It was covered in thousands of decaying dolls, hanging from trees, nailed to posts, some half buried in the mud, their plastic faces twisted into grotesque expressions. The island's caretaker, Don Julian Santana, had lived there for over 50 years. He claimed to have been haunted by the spirit of a young girl who drowned near the island, and the dolls were meant to appease her restless soul. He spent his life collecting and hanging the dolls as a form of protection. Julian had died under mysterious circumstances in 2001. His body was found in the same canal where the girl had drowned. People whispered that the dolls had something to do with it. Now it was my turn to explore this place, alone. The boat ride to the island was eerily quiet. My guide, a silent old man with deep-set eyes, didn't speak a word the entire journey. The air was heavy with humidity, and the thick foliage around the canal seemed to swallow all sound. As we approached the island, I could see the first of the dolls, hanging from a gnarled tree branch, its face blackened with mold, its eyes missing. More dolls came into view, dangling from the trees, swinging lazily in the wind, their broken limbs swaying like grotesque marionettes. "This is as far as I go," the boatman said in Spanish, pulling the boat to a stop at the island's edge. I hesitated. "You're not coming with me?" He shook his head, his eyes narrowing. "No one stays on the island after dark. No one." He spat over the side of the boat, then gestured for me to disembark. I slung my camera over my shoulder, my hands already sweating despite the cool breeze. As soon as I stepped off the boat and onto the muddy shore, I felt it, the weight of the island's oppressive atmosphere. It was as if the air itself was thicker here, harder to breathe. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or the distant creak of a doll's head turning in the wind. I took a deep breath and began to explore. The further I ventured into the heart of the island, the more unsettling it became. The dolls were everywhere, hanging from trees, nailed to wooden posts, their faces cracked and decayed, their eyes staring blankly. Some were missing limbs, others were covered in dirt and cobwebs. There was no pattern to how they were placed. It was as if they had been tossed there, abandoned, left to rot. I raised my camera and snapped a few pictures, but my hands were trembling. It wasn't just the appearance of the dolls, it was the feeling that they were watching me. I shook my head, trying to shake off the unease. It was just my imagination, I told myself. They were lifeless objects, nothing more. But as I made my way deeper into the island, that feeling of being watched intensified. I stopped at the base of a large tree, its twisted branches covered in dozens of dolls, some hanging by their necks, others with their faces turned toward the ground. One particular doll caught my attention. It was larger than the others, its face almost entirely intact, with glassy blue eyes that seemed far too lifelike. I moved closer, raising my camera to capture a shot. As I focused the lens, I heard it, a soft whisper. It was faint, almost like the wind, but it was unmistakable. "Help me!" I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. I scanned the area around me, but there was no one else here. I was completely alone. The whisper came again, clearer this time, as if it was right next to me. "Help me!" I stumbled back, nearly dropping my camera. My pulse quickened, and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I looked up at the dolls, their blank faces staring down at me from the trees. For the first time, I noticed something strange, the way their heads were angled, the way their eyes seemed to follow me. I told myself it was just the wind, just my overactive imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I forced myself to keep moving, determined to finish my exploration, but the whispers didn't stop. As I walked, they grew louder, more insistent, as if the island itself was trying to communicate with me. The voices overlapped, male and female, young and old, all saying the same thing. "Help us! I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The air had grown colder, the wind picking up, causing the dolls to sway in unison. Their eyes seemed to glint in the fading light. Their cracked lips parted as if they were about to speak. Suddenly, I heard a soft giggle, high-pitched, childlike. It echoed through the trees, cutting through the whispers. I spun around, my heart racing, but there was no one there. Just the dolls hanging silently, their faces frozen in twisted smiles. I backed up, my footsteps uneven on the muddy ground. I needed to leave. Now, but then I saw it, a small figure darting between the trees, just out of the corner of my eye. A child, perhaps? I turned my head, but it was gone. My chest tightened as I realized I was no longer alone. Someone, or something, was watching me from the shadows. Without thinking, I started to run, my boots slipping in the mud as I made my way back toward the shore. The whispers followed me, growing louder, more desperate. "Help us! Help us!" I didn't stop until I reached the boat, where the old man was waiting, his eyes wide with fear as he saw me approaching. Without a word, he pushed the boat off the shore, and we sped away from the island, the dolls' whispers fading into the distance. As the island disappeared behind us, I finally caught my breath. I tried to make sense of what had just happened, but the only thing that remained clear in my mind was the voice of the girl. "Help me!" Later that night, back in my hotel room, I reviewed the photos I had taken. Most of them were as expected, eerie shots of the dolls hanging in the trees. But then, in one of the photos, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Standing among the dolls, half hidden in the shadows, was a figure, a little girl, her face pale, her eyes hollow. She was staring directly at the camera, and in that moment, I understood the truth. The dolls weren't just hanging there for decoration. They weren't there to protect anyone. They were there to contain something far worse, and I had brought it back with me.